Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So, good afternoon to one and all. A warm welcome to all. So, we all know under Article 112 of the Constitution of India, central government of the Constitution laid down the annual financial report of the country. This report is commonly known as the Budget of India. So, a well-planned budget is of utmost importance for any country to ensure economic stability and growth. The budget will affect each and every person in the country in some or another way. And in-depth analysis of the budget is necessary to understand the impact on various sectors. In this context, we, Department of Economics, SRM University, organizing this panel discussion to understand the in-depth analysis of budget. So, for this discussion, we have 4 experts from public finance to have the discussion. So, the first panelist is Professor Srihari. He is the first Vice Chancellor of Bengaluru Ambedkar School of Economics University. Prior to this, worked as Professor Assistant Professor and Associate Professor at Institute of Economics located in. He has served over 22 government committees constituted by various ministries. Also, he worked with various state governments on advisory boards, and he also worked with Indian RBI, and he was a lot of advisory committees. Professor Banmurthy has been the Secretary of Indian Econometric Society since 2006 and is one of the main pillars of that particular society, which is running now successfully. And also a managing trustee of Indian Economic Association for Research and Development since 2010. Also, Professor Banmurthy has received 2 prestigious awards. One is Mahalanobis Memorable Award for the year 2014 for his outstanding contribution to the field of quantitative economics. And also VK.R.B. Rao Prize in Social Science in Economic Field for the year 2015 for high quality research and for significant contribution to social science research in India. We are delighted that we are having another expert, Professor K.R. Shanmugam, who is well-known public economist, and now currently he is Director of Madras School of Economics, Chennai. His area of interest is public finance, corporate finance, and macroeconomic models. He was previously associated with Institute of Financial Management, known as IFMR, and Madras Institute of Development Studies, MIDS. He has published more than 100 research articles and delivered more than 100 lectures at various workshops, training programs organized by both national and international agencies. He was a council member and also treasurer for the Indian Econometric Society, known as TIES. We are very happy that we are having Professor Gayatri Karnam in our expert, as one of our experts for this discussion. Professor Gayatri Karnam is Professor of Economics in the Center of Economic Studies and Policy at the Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. She specializes in the area of public economics, industrial economics, and public policy studies. She has served as an advisor on a number of state government committees and also as consultant to international donor agencies like USAID and DFID in the state level fiscal studies. She has been a recipient of Shastri Indo-Canadian Faculty Research Fellowship twice to undertake comparative fiscal studies at Carleton University, Canada. She has undergone training at Duke Center for International Development at Duke University on public budgeting and financial management. She has participated in executive education program on public financial management in changing world at John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. We are also having another eminent expert in public finance, Dr. Srihari Naidu. He is currently working as an economist at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, located at New Delhi. He completed his PhD from School of Economics, University of Hyderabad. His research interests are public finance, microeconomics, and open economics. Previously, he was associated with Rolac India Investment Limited. He has published various research articles both in national and international journals. We are fortunate enough that one of the best econometrians in the country, Professor Kamaya, kindly agreed to be the event moderator. He was Dean, School of Economics, Dean in charge of newly established Central University of Andhra Pradesh. He was also associated with Sri Mata Vaishno Devi University, IGIDR, and NIBM, National Institute of Banking Management. He was president of Indian Economic Society, known as TIES, and he is member in various board of governors, and also he is into UGC expert committee. Professor Kame has more than 150 research articles in his name. We are glad to share that we are joined by our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor V.S. Rao Garu and Professor Srinivas Desika. Thank you, sir. Your presence means a lot to us. Now I request the moderator of the event, Professor Kamya, to take over the panel discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Anand Rao, for all the good words. At the very outset, I must thank the university, the Vice Chancellor, Professor V.S. Rao Garu, the Dean of Slash and Management, Professor Desikan Garu, for inviting me to be the moderator of this session. I also thank the organizers, that is Department of Economics and all the faculty members. Truly, we are very fortunate that we have a panel of eminent economists who have worked in the area of public finance to share their thoughts on the current budget presented by Nirmala Sitharaman, our finance minister. Well, as a moderator, I'm not expected to speak at length. Other experts are there to share the ins and outs of the budget. Nevertheless, I would only highlight a few points. The first thing is, in my view, the budget is well crafted. That is first observation. Second, the budget is apolitical, especially in the backdrop of the coming elections of major states in the country. The budget courageously remained neutral. In that sense, the budget is apolitical in the sense that there is no populism in the budget. However, at the same time, there are no sensations as well in this budget. People from various walks of life, especially from the industry, the academia, from governments, they react to the budget in their own ways as per their ideologies and as per their knowledge base. On the whole, the budget believes in growth. The budget believes in the capabilities of capex and how the budget would lead to sustainability, a kind of steadfastness and predictability. In a sense, in certain respects, the budget is bold and imaginative. It is expected that it ignites the animal spirits in the economy, to use the Keynesian phrase, as supported by the increased capex uh, estimates. Now, coming to certain important salient features of the budget, the first thing is that the budget is more emphasis on the supply side. As economists and as those who are watching the Indian economy, it is clear that the emphasis is more on the supply side. The demand side, in a sense, is somewhat neglected. Then there is policy continuity. That is, it is leaping forward into the future by way of proposing digitization of the economy, then promoting 5G network, then also introducing certain innovations like drones and also startups. Then the budget also highlights the need for extending credit support to MSEs. Then yet another innovation that is there in the budget is that taxation of digital assets, then extending legitimacy to the bitcoins, leaving direct taxes unchanged, though in my view it is somewhat regressive, etc. The details, the nitty-gritty, etc., in terms of numbers, I think I leave it to the panelists to discuss. I would like to highlight 2 or 3 important issues for the comment of the experts and to share their views uh, on these matters. The first thing is about the growth promoting capability of the budget. Second thing is neglect of the rural sector. Third is neglect of the health sector. Okay. So growth process is an ongoing process. It is not that a one-time announcement of a budget by way of increase in capex would do miracles. It's a continuous process. And whatever you spend on the infra projects, there is always a gestation period to result in increased incomes or increased employment. So from that point of view, what we see in the near future is heavy spending. As a result of that, there is a possibility for the inflationary pressure to rise up, especially when there is no relief in respect of the central excises on petroleum and petroleum products, such as diesel, etc. Coupled with this, there is no employment generation in the rural sector as such. The support to MG Narega has been drastically reduced. All of us know about the popular decoupling hypothesis. That is, any expenditure by the government, by way of soaps or whatever you may call, this would fructify into increased output or employment. Only then the increased spending would reflect drastically on the demand side of the economy. So the decoupling hypothesis stipulates that any increase, let us say, which would lead to increase in expenditure, which would lead to incomes in the pockets of people who have high marginal propensity to consume via multiplier would enhance. But most of the expenditure on capex, the infra projects, are high capital incentive projects. Very little would be spent on enhancing the purchasing power of the labor force. So from this point of view, the multipliers, the mechanism of multiplier may not work very effectively. As it is, the second issue I would like to highlight is, as it is, there is a lot of unrest in the rural sector. The recent farmers' agitation is the best example. And also the recent trend of slackness in demand for automobiles and other consumers from the rural sector, which has registered a decline, is also indicative of continued unrest in the rural sector. So how to address the issue of generating employment, especially in the backdrop of reduction in the budget of MG Narega, etc. Okay, how to stem this issue is also a point for reflection. And other major highlights of the budget, I hope my co-panelists would reflect on those things. With these few observations, I now invite Dr. Bhanumurthy to comment on the budget and also share his views on what is going to be, what is more likely impact of the budget on the Indian economy. Professor Bhanumurthy.
Thank you, sir. First of all, let me thank SRM University Andhra Pradesh for inviting me to this panel discussion. Professor Rao, Professor Desikan, other panelists, Anand, and the participants. I think Professor Kame has made our life very easy by making, by reflecting on most of the aspects of the budget and its impact. I'm also very conscious that I'm going to speak in front of two of my teachers, Professor Kame and Professor Gayatri. So maybe sometime I'll get nervous, but please excuse me on that. With regard to the budget, as Professor Kame pointed out, one aspect which I think many of us has really appreciated is the continuity that it has shown with the previous budget. I think the last year budget, where I think we have seen how there was a huge change in the way the government prioritized the recovery of the economy, despite in the middle of the pandemic, right? And what we have seen in the recent budget is continuation of this priority, that as many of the people have already spoken, that the budget has actually continued to focus on the capital expenditure, and I think this fiscal multiplier issue has come up I think it has become a common word right now, fiscal multiplier and crowding in impact of the capital expenditure. All these things are common words in the discussion right now. And I'm very happy for that, because this has been my effort for the past 10 years. I was one of the guys who actually done that fiscal multiplier analysis in 2012. And now I think this 2.45 has become a general number in the policy discussion. And I keep saying that now onwards, I will not talk about fiscal multiplier because it's become a common word now. And I do believe that that is the crux of the FRBM Act that we have adopted in the year 2003, where you need to bring down the fiscal deficit to 3% and the revenue deficit to 0. And for some reason or for very many reasons, the central government has achieved only once in that whole 15 years, while that has been imposed on the state governments. But it has a large, implications on the way economy would recover. And as again Professor Kamaya pointed out, the capital expenditure will have a gestation period. I think for the same reason, I think there is a need for continuation of these policies. And I think that is the whole crux of the FRBM Act, where over a period of 5 years, you need to see that you will see the expenditure switching from revenue expenditure to the capital expenditure for a simple reason that it has large multiplier impact. And unfortunately, in Indian context, it's not been really understood much. Even before the budget, if you have seen, there's so much of discussion about whether the government should go for fiscal consolidation or they should go for growth recovery mechanism. And those who read my couple of write-ups that I have written, I said that fiscal consolidation, growth recovery, they are not two different concepts. They're actually complement each other. If you understand that fiscal consolidation is actually a fixed expenditure switching mechanism, not an expenditure compression mechanism. So the 2.45 that I said, for the benefit of the students, those who are here, the multipliers basically say that, if you are spending 1 rupee on any of the expenditures, what is the return that you get as in terms of the output? So we estimated that the capital expenditure multiplier is 2.45. That means if you're spending 1 rupee, you will get more 2.45 rupees return in the period of the expenditure. But if you look at the cumulative multiplier, generally, which that's exactly what Professor Kamaya pointed out, that in the overall project period, the cumulative multiplier is not limited to 2.45. It is somewhere close to 4.6 or 4.7. So that is the whole philosophy of FRBM. And if you look at the revenue expenditure, you don't get any cumulative multiplier impact. You only end up with the impact multiplier that to less than 1. Our estimate was 0.98, but RBI estimated in the recent period, in fact, they say that it is actually 0.45, which is much, much smaller than what we have estimated. So although it's a dynamic concept, but intrinsically, it is giving a feeling that, the revenue expenditure, if the purpose is to really grow fast, I think the revenue expenditure is not the route, rather it is the capital expenditure. And I completely agree with Professor Kamaya that this budget, one of the two areas, I'll come to the second area. With the first area, one of the important areas which the budget has completely ignored is not only health, but also the education sector. I think these are the two major ingredients of the overall social sector, and everybody expected that there's going to be increase in the allocation for these two sectors. But what we've seen was actually reduction in those expenditures as percentage to GDP. We have seen a reduction in those expenditures. I think that is certainly a very big cause for concern for all of us. But I thought maybe the feeling is that it is the state government, they need to fill up the gaps in terms of health and education expenditure, because they think the allocation to the states have actually increased in the post 14th Finance Commission period, and with that also they seems to have allocated more responsibility also to the states. So in that sense, it looks like the central government seems to be withdrawing from health and education expenditure, although they want to have a policy like a national education policy and national health mission kind of a centrally sponsored schemes. So that is certainly a cause for concern. But it's true that the government has focused heavily on capital expenditure. But if you look at intrinsically, the second point which I thought I would bring it to the discussion, the second theme that I've been working for the past 4 or 5 years is that why should government keep spending, increasing expenditure every year, on the schemes which they don't even have much idea about it, except on the MGNREGS or the Prime Minister Awas Yojana or Prime Minister Gram Sadak Yojana, something related to rural sector. The rest of the schemes, I'm not really sure that Central has much information about how they are spending and what's happening to the allocations, what's happening to the outlay that they do it. So I thought it's very important for our profession to bring this concept of public expenditure efficiency. There are a lot of schemes which doesn't have sunset clauses. I don't know how it is in Andhra Pradesh, but some of the states that I'm working, they have schemes something like 1,800, 2,200 schemes in two of the states where I'm working without any sunset clauses. And we don't even know how the schemes have been managed. And we want to see that expenditure need to be increased every year. So I think it's very important to bring the concept of public expenditure efficiency. I was almost hoping that it will become part of the 15th Finance Commission, because one of the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission was public expenditure efficiency. So I think going forward, we also need to focus on the outcome budgets. Of course, the budget has some document called outcome, but I don't think that's a very serious document, because even before completion of one financial year, you cannot produce the outcome document based on those expenditures. So they will only tell you that how much you have spent, but it doesn't give you how much return that you have achieved under that kind of expenditure. So there are two things. One is focusing heavily on capital expenditure. Second is focusing on public expenditure efficiency becomes very, very important for all of us. And in all these things, one important number which I think the public policy makers have completely ignored, again, if you have seen today's Hindu newspaper, there is a very drastic statement by Finance Secretary that the rating agencies are not really looking at the good policy measure that the government has introducing, but they struck with this public debt number. I think this has been my concern also for almost 10 years now. I think more than the fiscal deficit, more than the revenue deficit, more than the GDP, of course, they're all interrelated. I think what is important for the public policy is to focus on the public debt to GDP ratio, both at the central government level and also at the state government level. So right now, we are sitting with a debt of something close to 93 or 94%, which was just less than 70% 2 years back. Right now, we are talking about 93, 94%. So if you want to really focus on containing the public debt to GDP ratio, I think we need to really focus on these two concepts, that is capex as well as public expenditure efficiency. Otherwise, you don't have a strategy to bring down that public debt to GDP ratio below 65 or whatever the Finance Commission has suggested.
Yes. Dr. Banmurthy here, don't you see some trade-off between increase in capex and also the mounting debt?
I'll come to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that is worthy of.
Yes. Yes. So I have a technical paper on fiscal consolidation with high growth, which we have done for the 13th Finance Commission. And I did similar work for the 14th Finance Commission and also for the 15th Finance Commission. Now, if you are targeting the debt to GDP ratio to be brought down to any level, for example, from 90% to 70%, only strategy that is left for you is to, see that the numerator the increase in the numerator should be lower than the increase in the denominator. There's no other option where we can bring down the public debt to GDP ratio. So if that is the target, I think you need to focus more on the capital expenditure, much more than on the revenue expenditures. And that's the reason why some of the if you look at the state governments, I think the state governments have been asked to run revenue surpluses because they need to contain the public debt to GDP ratio at the state level up to 20% compared to the central government of 40%.
So this is all possible when there is crowding in private investment. So what prospects do you foresee on this?
Sir, this is a mechanism. This is the bet I think that the government is making. And if you look at between 2003 and 2007 or 2008, that is the only period where we have a very good example in terms of the crowding in impact. So you'll see that 3 years or 5 years period, what we have seen was we have seen the revenue deficit coming down to 0% for the central government. And in fact, that is the period. In fact, I used to, I think there was one nice graph which can explain this very clearly. So there is a decline in the revenue deficit from 2003 to 2008 to 0%. And that is the same period where we have seen the private investment is actually peaking.
Yeah, that was a totally different period. That was a boom period.
No, it's a combination of that, sir. The only policy, fiscal policy from 2003 in that period was to try to get into this FRBM roadmap.
And there were strict guidelines for enforcing FRBM.
At that point of time.
But now I think government is also in a very relaxed mode, not only relaxing norms for itself as well as for state governments. I think now they are competing. As you know.
So this is the period, this is an unusual period. Yeah. This is an unusual period. And there are also another lessons, sir. In fact, this opposite of what we have seen between 2003 and 2008 is what we have seen between 2008 and 2013. It's just completely opposite of that, where we had a runaway fiscal deficit largely because of increase in the revenue deficit in the name of stimulus measures for following global financial market crisis. What happened was it has actually compressed the capital expenditure. And then we have seen the revenue deficit going up to, in fact, right now, there is no target of revenue deficit under the revised FRBM Act. So I think if you look at the 2018, they removed the revenue deficit as part of the FRBM Act. So if you look at 2008 to 2013, we ended up with a complete macroeconomic vulnerability largely because of the runaway fiscal deficit that we had at the central government level. So you have two examples which are opposite of each other.
Yes, correct. So now I think, shall we invite Dr. Shanmugam?
I have only one minute I'll take, sir.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So the one is another major issue that which is little uncomfortable with the budget is the bringing in many commodities under the customs tariff lines. And I think it's one of the reasons why India could become the fastest growing economy in the recent period is actually because of the policies that we adopted in post 90s, where, and I keep telling to my students that the biggest reforms happen on the trade side is actually bringing down the import tariffs from 300 or 400% to less than 10%. Now, actually, that did very well for us. And in fact, the empirics also support that whatever the exports that we have seen in the manufacturing sector is largely import-led. So given that kind of a situation, bringing in this more custom tariff lines and bringing in more commodities under the custom duties actually is going to have a negative impact on the exports. And that's something that I thought I would like to highlight here, because this has been happening since last two budgets. We are getting an additional document as part of the budget that is called customs notifications, which was not there in the documents for the past 20 years. So this new custom notifications document might play, might contain the recovery process in the economy in the coming period. So I'll stop here, but I can come back later.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bhanumurthy. But here one observation is that it is just an observation. See, the direct taxes were left untouched, almost. And people are happy because there is increase in tax revenue. And the impact of tax revenue on fiscal deficit is positive. There is a reduction in deficit from 6.9% to expected 6.4%. As it is, the burden of taxes, of indirect taxes, squarely falls on the poor and the middle class. And budget has not given any soaps or any relief for these sections. What would be the level of distress? This we can discuss, later also. Right. So for paucity of time, I now request Dr. Shanmugam to share his views on the budget.
So thank you, sir. First of all, let me thank SRM University for giving me the opportunity to become the panelist of this discussion on Union Budget 2022-23. I thank the moderator, Dr. Gamaya, and other panelists and the faculty, our Honorable Vice Chancellor of SRM University, and all the students. I think already Dr. Banamurthy and covered most of the economic issues, right? But for the benefit of the students, I thought first I can briefly explain the environment in which the budget is presented and what are the issues relating to FRBM Act, and then I can move on to other issues. As we know all that the pandemic affected almost all growth engines of our economy, particularly the service sector. The service sector growth declined to minus 8.4% in the year 2021-22. The rate of contraction of our economy of minus 7.3% last year was sharpest among the major economies, next only to the UK with minus 9.7% decline. All we know that the growth registered a V-shaped recovery, but the average 4 years average growth rate from 2018-19 to 2021-22 was only about 3%. So this is a background that we have, and also the gross fixed capital formation GDP ratio declined from about 40% around 2007-8 to less than 30% in recent years. Inflation remained very high. For example, the WPI inflation was 13.6% in December 2021. Because of the COVID-19 impact, we lost a lot of job opportunities significantly during the pandemic period and subsequently also. The government finances, both central government and state government finances were severely affected because of the COVID-19 shock. The only the positive point is that our balance of payment remained surplus throughout the last 2 years. So given this background, there is a necessity for the government to provide a lot of fiscal stimuli for revival of our economy through budget with the limited fiscal phase we have. But interestingly, the budget has attempted to provide the necessary fiscal stimuli through increased capital expenditure. The center's capital expenditure is budgeted at 2.9% of GDP in 2022-23, that is the fiscal year 23, as against the 2021-22 revised estimate of 2.6%. This year is the highest capital expenditure GDP ratio since from 2008-9. In addition to that, the budget allocates 1 lakh crore to the states for capex in the year 2022-23 as the 50-year interest-free loans over and above the borrowings normally allowed for state government from the central government. Together, the effective capex of the central government is rupees 10.68 lakh crore, which will about 4.1% of GDP. This is clearly a welcome move. Basically, FRBM Act says that the fiscal deficit should be 3%, and also this should be spent on capital investment. But this year, the center's capital investment is going to be 4.1% of GDP. This would definitely help accelerating the growth in the current year and also in the subsequent years. But as rightly pointed out by Dr. Bhanumurthy, there is a great concern about the fiscal consolidation. The budget shows that the fiscal deficit will be 6.4% of GDP in 2022-23, which is slightly less than 6.9% in last year, 21-22. But this number is higher than the 15th Finance Commission estimates of 5.5%. But the budget says that the fiscal deficit ratio will reach 4.5% in the year 2025-26. Important is the quality of fiscal deficit. But currently, the new FRBM Act says that there is no need to worry about the revenue deficit. But the quality of fiscal deficit matters, because fiscal deficit is the net borrowing of the government. Generally, it is expected that this borrowed amount should be spent on capital expenditure. If we use this money for meeting a revenue expenditure, then it is a matter. So the quality of fiscal deficit, as indicated by the ratio of revenue deficit to fiscal deficit, is 60%. But of course, it is the lowest from 2016-17, but still it is the major concern. According to the economic survey, the country's total debt GDP ratio is close to 90% at the end of the year 21-22. It may increase to 93 in the year 22-23. Out of this, the center's debt is estimated to be around 60%. There are evidences to show that already our total debt and also the central government debt are unsustainable. For instance, the recent paper by Dr. D.K. Srivastava et al. 2021 show that the country's sustainable level of debt to GDP ratio is about 59.3%. In fact, the new FRBM committee headed by Dr. N.K. Singh also pointed out that 60% could be the sustainable level of public debt for the country, and 40% for the central government, and the remaining 20% for the state government. But now the central debt is exceeded 60%, but 40 is the limit. So the question is, how do we bring, already the debt is unsustainable, but now they keep on adding the debt. That is a major issue for the central government to finance. The other issue is that the budget says that it can allow the states to show 4% fiscal deficit GDP ratio in the coming financial year. So this will aggravate the problem. The state will also come out with more than this 4% fiscal deficit GDP ratio. Already states' debts are unsustainable. Now the problem is going to be very serious. So we need to address this issue. Otherwise, the country is already in so that we will get into debt trap and other problems. But one may argue that because of the pandemic, it would have been happened, but it is not. Our debt level were unsustainable 4 or 5 years ago. Okay. So this happened because both central governments and state governments violated FRBM norms continuously. Particularly the central government violated, except as rightly pointed out by Dr. Bhanumurthy, except in 1 year, in almost all years from 2003 onwards, they violated FRBM Act. Now let me come to the sectoral allocations in the budget and their implications. For agriculture, there are some announcements. Rupees 2.37 lakh crore direct payment of MSP value to 1.63 crore farmers account for procurement of wheat and paddy. So this is the first announcement. This will surely increase the disposable income of farmers, particularly the rural community. Next, the Prime Minister Gati Shakti is designed to support farmers with better connectivity of marketplaces. This is also an important aspect for the rural community. And also the budget allocate 45,000 crore for promotion of scientific organic farming in northeastern states. That will definitely protect the ecology in eastern states and also promoting the organic farming in the country. And also it talks about farming without chemical usage. So already, most of our lands are spoiled because of the usage of fertilizer. We have many environmental consequences. So this is an initiation, but I understand, but this will definitely solve our most of our land issue and so on. And also the budget provides certain exemption of basic customs duty for specific agricultural implements and parts used for manufacturing, that include the paddy transplanter, sugarcane harvester, cotton picker, etc. from 1st April 2023. That will reduce the cost of production of these items. That will benefit farming community. And also to promote harvest value addition, consumption and branding of millet products, there is an announcement in the budget. I think these are important announcements for agricultural sector. But there are certain concerns. Major concern is that the food subsidy is reduced to 2.68 lakh crore in 2022-23 from 5.41 lakh crore in 2020-21 actual, because the food subsidy is halved. So we don't know what, but reducing the subsidy is important, but this much reduction would definitely have some implications. So we need to consider this. Next, the fertilizer subsidy also reduced to rupees 1.05 lakh crore. So this reduction will definitely have significant implications on the price of the agricultural product. Next is the MSME sector. The budget says that there is the emergency credit line guarantee scheme is expanded by 50,000 crore to cover rupees 5 lakh crore. The emergency credit line guarantee scheme is also extended till March 2023. This will, to some extent, will benefit the MSME sector. Another announcement is that 2 lakh crore additional credit for micro and small enterprises to be facilitated under the Credit Guarantee Trust for Micro and Small Enterprises. Then rising, accelerating MSME programs, performance program with outlay of 6,000 crore to be rolled out. Then the special economic zones will be replaced with the new legislation with an object of optimally utilizing available infrastructure, enhancing competitiveness of export. And also, in order to achieve the target of 280 gigawatt of installed solar power capacity by 2030, additional allocation of 19,500 crore for PLI scheme for domestic manufacture of high efficiency models. Actually, these announcements are very useful budget support for MSME sector, but there are some more concerns. Most MSMEs are severely and financially constrained by the pandemic effect. Already they borrowed, and many of them are still not in a position to repay their loans and interest. So instead of giving additional loans, the interest subvention or concession or direct credit will be given. So this is the concern raised by many MSME companies. The next sector is transport. Of course, railways and roads are more important. We are in a position to modernize in order to match with the requirement of the international standard. The budget provides some space for improving our transport sector. The budget talks about one station, one product. Definitely that will help local business and the supply chain. Then 200,000 kilometers of railway network to be brought under the Kavach, the indigenous world-class technology and the capacity accommodation in 22-23. Then 400 new generation Vande Bharat train with better energy efficiency and passengers riding experience to be manufactured through next 3 years. Then 100 Prime Minister Gati Shakti cargo terminals for multimodal logistics to be developed during the next 3 years. The network of national highway to be expanded by 25,000 kilometers in 2022-23 sector. The investment of 20,000 crore for such infrastructure projects to be mobilized through innovative ways of financing. Then Prime Minister Gati Shakti Master Plan for Express Way to formulate in 22-23 to facilitate faster movement of people, goods, and transport. The focus on green energy, uh, clean mobility solution, battery swapping policy, interoperability standard. I think these are all welcome announcements in the budget supporting the transport sector. But there are few concerns. These investments are going to be made with expectation that they will create additional employment, income, and growth. But a lot more is required to modernize our transport sector. And we need to wait and watch to see how these investments will promote employment opportunities. Next is education. There are only few announcements about education, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Bhanumurthy. I think now the states should take care of more about education. The budget says one class, one TV channel program to be expanded into 200 TV channel. A digital university will be established with world-class quality universal education, high quality e-content through digital teachers. I think this will definitely help the education sector. Given the pandemic impact, now mostly the digital education is going on. But there are concerns. The budget is silent about the new education policy. Our public expenditure on education relative to GDP is only around 4%. This is relatively low compared to many developed nations. So we need to allocate more for education sector. Next is the health sector. There are a few announcements. One is the national digital health ecosystem will be rolled out. The national tele-mental health program for quality counseling. These are the two major announcements. Okay, these are all fine. They are welcome announcement. But still, India compares poorly in terms of many health parameters. We are not closer to international standards in meeting the health requirements. So, a comprehensive plan and allocations are required for the health sector. Regarding the housing and real estate sector, the budget says that 48,000 crore allocated for completion of 8 lakh houses in 2022-23 under Prime Minister Awas Yojana. This will definitely help poor people for getting housing facility. And also it talks about establishing the Center of Excellence in Urban Planning. It says the states to be encouraged to adopt a unique land parcel identification number to facilitate the digitalization of the land record. But there is a question mark whether this movement will bring uniformity in the stamp duty and registration fees like our GST. So many states are worrying about this kind of move. Another concern is that still a large number of people in our country live without own houses, particularly in urban areas. In urban areas, many families are migrant families. They are living in rental houses. I think we need to make many more schemes in comprehensive way to support these people. Regarding employment, as Professor Gamia rightly pointed out, they reduced the Mahatma Gandhi rural employment, the fund allocation to this scheme from 1 lakh 11,170 crore in 2020-21 to about 73,000 in 22-23. There is about 40% cut, about 40% cut. This may have significant impact on the rural employment. But the budget says the 60 lakh new jobs will be created under productivity linked incentive scheme in 14 sector. It also says the PLI schemes have potential to create additional production of 30 lakh crore. But we need to wait and watch to see whether these will definitely benefit, it will promote employment. We are not sure about, but we have to wait and watch.
Yeah, I think Dr. Shanmugam.
Yes, sir.
Try to
Yes,
summarize.
sir. Yes, sir. Okay. And also there are some more announcements for technology side, drinking water, oil, financial services, defense, etc. But the point is that given the pandemic and its impact, I think the budget tried its level best to do whatever possible, but still a lot is needed for our country and the society. Let me stop here, and if opportunity I get again, then I will share some other views. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Shanmugan. You have given a very balanced view, supported by facts and figures of the various aspects of the budget. So what is your quick overall comment? Do you think this budget is growth promoting? Do you think that this budget has potential for employment generation? And further, to what extent this budget would be reducing the rural stress or distress? Quick comment.
Sir, basically, actually the central government doesn't have a fiscal space because of the pandemic. Already I pointed out the growth rate is average growth rate is only 3.1% for the last 4 years. So the revenue buoyancy very less. In fact, they indicated in the budget that the revenue received will increase only by 6%. So there is no fiscal phase. So given fiscal phase, the budget tried its level best. But despite the fiscal deficit is very high, the debt ratio has been increasing. But they made a lot of announcement. They are not going to be completed within a year, but over 1 or 2 years. But a lot of interesting announcements to support the rural as well as employment. But overall, I find that it is not very. I mean, I cannot say it's an excellent budget. It's like a balanced budget given our pandemic and other problems. Sir.
Thank you very much for all your observations. Now I think I invite Professor Gayatri to share her thoughts on the budget.
Sir, thank you so much. Thank you so much. At the outset, I need to really thank the SRM University, Professor Rao, Vice Chancellor, Professor Desikan, Dean, Dr. Anand Rao, for inviting me. And of course, the main person being Professor Kamaya, who roped me into this discussion. So thank you very much for making me a part of this excellent panel. Okay, this has made my job easy and also difficult. Okay, easy because you gave such a wonderful initial remarks, which basically gave us some and substance of what the budget is all about and what are its implications and things like that. And followed by two stalwarts in public finance, Professor Bhanumurthy and Dr. Shanmugam, who have by and large covered, have not really left anything for me to sort of say on the budget as such. So I think I'll basically sort of take a little bit of time to not just reel all the or crunch all the numbers. I think a lot of number crunching has been done by Professor Shanmugam, who has actually given out by each and every sector and each and every important element of the budget, the numbers have been given. And in fact, I had just put down some of those. I'm going to skip all that now because I do not want to repeat and, sort of make the panel uninteresting. So what I thought was I will basically talk about the philosophy or the policy implications of this budget, rather than just go through the numbers. Taking into account the broad announcements made in the budget, what are the policy implications and whether we are in the right direction to achieve whatever has been pronounced by the government as such. So first of all, I was trying to put the whole thing, let's remind ourselves that by looking at just one single budget, we will not be in a position to comment on what exactly is the implication for the economy. It has to be a continuous process. We need to really look at whether the budgets are in alignment with the existing context and whether the proposals that are made in the budget actually reflect the current need and the future need of the economy as such, and whether the proposals have been populated with adequate expenditure numbers. What is the amount of expenditure, spending proposals which are being made by the government, And I think the most important, I'm going to talk about each one of these, basically not by giving the numbers, but just talking about what are the major issues emerging from these. Okay, and whether these are really going to be taken forward with the same kind of a conviction that has been put down in the budget as such. So I think the initial situation, that the condition in which this particular, the context in which this budget has been prepared has been adequately highlighted by Professor Shanmugam. All of us know that the entire globe has been going through this pandemic situation, which has by and large adversely affected the economies, the worst being that of India. Because I was just looking at one of the Ministry of Finance recent publications where they talk about global stringency index. Okay, this extent of lockdown which has been announced by the government, how much of how stringent it has been is something which has been noted to be that India is one of the highest, rather the highest. Obviously, it has had its most adverse impact on the economy. And I think it went down by almost 23%. Let's also remind ourselves that the deceleration or decline did not happen only with the pandemic. And even before that, I think the 1 quarter before that, the decline had started. In the sense, the rate of growth had dropped. Okay, so this is the context. The context is a major responsibility on the part of the government to revive the economy. We also know that while we've been talking about, while there has been a lot of policy emphasis on bringing in a lot of private investment, there have been a lot of issues, and despite flush funds available with the banks and the lending agencies, the private investment has not kicked up as much as it was required as such. So the basic responsibility lies on the government. So keeping this background in mind, whether this particular budget does justice to bring back the growth or kickstart the economy once again. And I'm really happy. I think Madam Nirmala Sitharaman really used very technical terms, I think, which Professor Bhanumurthy has really been, we've been quoting Professor Bhanumurthy's work on multiplier and stuff like that. So we're basically talking about pump priming the economy. As students of economics, we know how during Great Depression, this was one of the major strategies suggested when the private sector failed. I think she borrowed those terms, and then she uses pump priming and crowding in a very, very significant manner. I think in all her subsequent discussions in the media, she referred to these terms, and then she literally quoted the multiplier numbers all over, talking about the importance of capital investment. So keeping this background in mind, do we have the right proposals in the budget? Yes. And she also talks about vision for India at 100. Okay, it's not for 1 year, 2 years. It is vision for India at 100. I think this is something all of us know. It's time we reflected upon whether we have the right strategies in place, not just for 1 year, 2 years, but for a much longer term. We need to really grow, given the advantages that India has in terms of demographic dividend. We've been going around everywhere saying that India will be the top economy by 2050 because of our demographic dividend. But do we have the capability to achieve this? That's a question that we have to pose to ourselves. So given all this background, so I was just trying to look at not just the expenditure proposals which have been announced, as I again reiterate the point that Professor Shanmugam has given all the numbers, major numbers which are required for discussion. So when I look at the way these numbers and how they are really being sort of, what is the strategy, what is the approach adopted by the government in using this to sustain, not just kickstart the economy once again, but whether we have the capability to sustain this in the long run. I'm analyzing this budget from that point of view. I'm drawing extensively from our past experience on the fiscal front, whether we've been really doing a great job. Okay, so to start with the fiscal consolidation, I think there has been a lot of discussion on fiscal consolidation. Again, I think Professor Bhanumurthy was referring to how to actually use the term fiscal consolidation. Okay, I mean, like, do we really sort of talk about compressing expenditure? Is it the right thing to do for a country like India, which is really trying to promote its economic growth. So if you really look at the composition of fiscal consolidation or fiscal deficit as such, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, based on the FRBM committee review, she has conveniently pushed the revenue deficit under the carpet, although she very intelligently, she brings in the concept of effective capital expenditure. Okay, talking about what are the grants given to the state governments, which will result in capital assets, and that also by factoring in, she says that the capital listing has gone up to some 10 and odd lakh crore as such. Okay, that's fine. But then when coming back to the issue of fiscal consolidation, it's not suppressing or reducing the expenditure, which is important, but looking at the quality of expenditure, which has to be used for judging where we are heading to. Okay, I mean, like, yes, this budget, there has been an effort. I think at least the highlights which are presented by the Ministry of Finance in the key features, they do refer to revenue deficit and effective revenue deficit as such. So in the current budget estimate, there is definitely a decline. Okay, but if you really look at the kind of rules that we have framed, the rule is to bring it down to zero. I think it was beyond 2007, we have not really been able to make any good progress on fiscal consolidation. But given this panel, which is an excellent panel, which has a very great understanding of the finances of government, the first question that we have to pose is whether this is the right number for a country like India, that too at the present juncture. Okay, I can understand if the condition is one of using the entire net borrowing for capital investments. That is something which I think as a part of Maastricht Treaty also, which was put down, whether we will be in a position to do that. Can we use the entire borrowings for capital investments? I think at the central government level, the problem is one of very huge share of the revenue deficit. No doubt in a very welcome manner, it has come down to some extent now, but it used to constitute almost close to the 70%. So while it's a happy situation for going by the point of view of rating agencies, I do not know what are the grounds on which rating agencies really, sort of, compare. I mean, like, I think they should really look at more detailed kind of requirements of the country rather than just look at broad numbers. Okay, but then I think the fact of the matter remains that while we are heading towards 4.5% of fiscal deficit as a percent of GDP, which Madam Nirmala Sitharaman said we'll be achieving, I think it's high time we sort of focus more on revenue deficit, although it is not one of the requirements any longer as a part of the FRBM review committee. Okay, that having said that, in fact, we don't have time. I would like to certainly go into the details of how the infrastructure investments have been made in the country. We have done actually some kind of empirical verification which sectors more money is going. I don't think we need to really go into all that, but then certainly coming back to the issue of expenditure proposals, I'm particularly very happy that the focus has been brought back to capital investments. Okay, even then the basic question remains, is it adequate? I think the fact that this particular budget has enhanced the capital allocations, I do not think that should be a factor to be complacent about. One has to go back and see whether it is really adequate. I think that is something which we need to really look at. I think that's not easy to sort of work out, at the back of an envelope. One has to certainly look at the infrastructure requirements of the economy. More scientific estimates have to be prepared as to what is the requirement, whether it is to what extent it is behind the adequate level and things like that, rather than just take pride that the capital investments are on the increase. But definitely it is an alignment with the overall vision that the budget has proposed, laid down for itself, that it wants to promote growth with inclusive development. There are many proposals for inclusive development also. So it's a step in the right direction. But still the question mark is whether we have adequate amounts. Okay, so 1 lakh extra support has been given to the state governments. But one thing that impresses me in this particular exercise is capital investment is a good start. What I hope will help the government to sustain this is the way this is being approached by the government. Now it says sabke saath, okay. In the sense, it's not saying that government alone will do it. It has said that central government, state government, and the private players, all of them are going to be a part of this. I think that is a very, very good step and step in the right direction. And the second important thing that talks about the very novel about this particular budget is the modern infrastructure. I think we are in the globalized world where the entire world is fast forwarding towards more advanced technologies and all that. So that is where I think I'm very happy that the emphasis is on modern infrastructure. And an even more gratifying fact is that she talks about capacity building or skill upgradation all along. She recognizes the fact that the very fact that they're trying to put all these 7 engines, like, be roads, railways, ports, like mass transportation, everything together, and having this information available in one place. And what she emphasizes is on the need to build the capacity of all the stakeholders, from the planning to execution to sort of finally, I think, monitoring also. I don't really recollect. I think that is a step towards sustaining the effort. I think we need to really appreciate these kind of interventions rather than the numbers which are being announced by the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister as such. We have happened to sort of carry out a study on apprenticeship policy. Okay. To this thing, we came to understand that while these departments operate in silos, okay, I mean, the ITIs are left on one hand to have their own syllabus, then there are departments which have their own strategies. There is an IT kind of a this thing. What she talks about is to sort of bringing all of them together. Okay, bringing all of them together and have the skills that are required currently for the market. I think this is something which we need to really look at as a step towards having India at 100 with a very high growth. I think these details have been addressed, and I think that these are very, very steps in the right direction. Now, coming to the issue, of course, urban development. The focus is not, I think.
Madam, can I request you to be brief?
Okay, I'll just finish.
Yeah.
I know time also gets compressed.
Yeah.
So, urban development, the focus is on gainful employment. Okay, I mean, because we're not really looking at doles, giving away doles. We are looking at creating gainful employment, creating the understanding.
Sir, I just wanted to
Infrastructure needs.
His name is not there in that list, in the mail that has been sent to Ravi.
Okay, now I think these are some of the things which I would certainly appreciate, and I would say that these are the right kind of initiatives or the approaches which have been taken by the government to sort of bring about a sustained recovery in the economy as such. Coming to the question of expenditure declines which have happened, or rather not having a significant increase in certain sectors, be it Narega, I think Bhanumurthy made a very valid point, and this is something which we also keep talking about in our research. I do not think it's a very, very good strategy to go on stepping up allocations year on year without verifying whether that is the amount which is needed. If we really, there has been a lot of research which has talked about duplication of programs, redundant programs. So now if we're talking about fiscal space, I think the first step has to be taken by reviewing the expenditure and then sort of making it more efficient so that we gain some savings out of that. Having said all this, I have my own concerns about the budget. Yes, all these good proposals will work out the benefits only if these are executed well. Okay, that's something beyond the budget. I don't think we need to really look at how they get executed as such. And then one more important thing is about the outcomes as such. Okay, like whether, before talking about enhancing the allocations, have we made any assessment of what is the progress currently made? some house, I mean, like construction of houses we talked about. Okay, do we have a correct assessment of what is the requirement at the ground level? And do we have a proper outcome framework? I was looking at that particular document also. What we have is a very, very crude form of outcome framework. I think that needs to be worked on in a very, very significant manner, even before we talk about bringing about any kind of development as such. I think I'll stop here. And then I think maybe if there is some discussion, I'll just come back to you. Sure. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, madam, very much for your very thoughtful discussion on the budget. I think you looked at the budget in an entirely different way, mainly in terms of policy continuity issues, etc. So based on what I heard from you, I have two questions for you. Okay. See, on the one hand, rightly rather, you maintain that the capital expenditure that is proposed is inadequate. And at the same time, the debt question is alarming. Okay. So any thought on how this trade-off could be resolved? That's one thing. Second, we are living in a globalized world and our objective is to move forward. Okay. And at the same time, we have a large chunk of the population. They may be educated, but in respect of skills, there is something very much lacking. Okay. So how to address the issue of bridging the skill gap and taking the demographic dividend forward to participate effectively in the globalization process. So these are the two concerns which I have after listening to your lecture, which you may reflect when we come up for discussion.
Yes.
Thank you once again, madam, for your very brilliant lecture. You looked at the budget in an entirely different way, the budget being a link in the whole continuity of the growth process. Thank you very much. Yeah. So now I request Dr. Srihari to present his views on the budget. Srihari, you are on mute.
I'm trying to just share the slides, sir. Anand, could you please share the slides I have which I have shared? Somehow I'm not able to share from here.
I'm doing it, sir.
Yeah, please.
Give me a minute.
I'm really sorry. I thought I can share from here, but somehow it is.
I hope you're able to see
yeah. Professor Kamaya, Professor Banamurthy, Professor Shanmugam, Professor Gayatri, Professor V.S. Rao, and Dean Desikan. And Andarki Namaskaram. I really thank you, SMR University, SRM University, and faculty for giving me this opportunity. Professor Banamurthy sir is nervous to present before two of his teachers, and you can imagine my situation and presenting in all before five topmost economists of the country. And I humbly request, please correct me if there are any inconsistencies. So with this, I focus my presentation is entirely on the revenue part and only on the taxation part. So I'll confine myself to taxation aspects of the budget. So what I'm trying to showcase here in the first slide is the pandemic impact, socioeconomic impact. In the sense, this is a backdrop in which the budget is presented. So there are supply disruptions and set of issues which we whole globe is facing. So in this context, the budget has to be looked at. Next. Next. Yeah. Here, sorry. Here, Professor Gayatri actually highlighted this point already, where the pump priming and Keynesian pump priming issue. So the same issue I have shown here in a vicious circle, where there is, due to lockdown, due to stringent measures of controlling of the pandemic, the people lost their livelihood and the stagnation of the economy, no economic activity. So we related low incomes, and which has generated a kind of circle, which became a kind of vicious circle. So which, to break that, there is a pump priming is needed. And now the question is, there is a fact that the government has announced that it is increasing the capex. But now the question is, how much of this will actually be realized? And the new point which I learned now is like, yes, there is a capital gestation period which will also kick in. So how will it translate? But whatever, if how much of this will be actually realized, if that is the question, the answer lies in the finances. So how good the government how good the government finances improve over the year, that will really actually give us answer to how we will be able to meet our expenditure commitments. Next. So yeah, this is where my presentation start actual things. I'm really sorry to rather put lot of data here, but please, I request you to look at only the not only, I mean, the focus should be on the red highlighted cells, where the point, the last line, where we have revenue, tax revenue of the central government, and that is a percentage. If you look at the government assumption of around 10% growth in the tax revenues, that's what is coming into when it is compared to 21, 22 RE, and if you look at GST revenues, that about 50% is projected, which is an indication that economy is government is looking at more economic activity in a good manner. But only thing where there is a little bit of concern is about the taxes on commodities and exports, commodities and services, where the union excise duties are projected to be, in fact, they're not growing. I mean, they're actually coming down. So that means that is assumption. That means probably this is all reflected in the announcements that the budget has made regarding the increase in custom duties and excise duties. So maybe we'll come to that aspect one by one. So if you look at the rather raw data, it doesn't actually give us a good picture. So when we take the tax revenues, absolute numbers, as a percentage of GDP, then it makes more sense. We can at least learn some kind of dynamics here. So what we are looking at here basically is all that different tax heads as a percentage of GDP. I think it is wrongly written as GSDP. It is actually GDP. So the last line again is basically tax revenue as a percentage of GDP. So the tax GDP ratio. So it is around 7.88%. So the gross GSTR, I mean, gross tax revenue is around 10%. So the tax GDP ratio in India is actually stagnant for quite, say, like almost 2 decades now. So which has to be, there should be some, we have to address this issue because this is one of the main issue. So if you look at corporation tax and taxes on income, and where there is a good amount of progress, which we can see from in 2022 and 23 BE. So now the people who question who analyze the budget, take the two views. One is if government project the tax revenues, I mean the next fiscal year tax revenues, in a very bullish manner. That means if the government say that the tax revenues are going to increase by 30%, then we say that it is very optimistic or very highly unrealistic. And when the government say that it is going to increase by 10%, we say that, which is basically equivalent to our GDP growth rate. So the parity, the tax buoyancy, if it is maintained, I mean the tax revenues are also projected on equivalent terms of GDP growth rate, then we say people are actually commenting that they're conservative estimates, or so probably what I think is probably the realistic estimates the government has announced in this budget. So that is, I think, probably good from the government point of view. Next. So as I was mentioning that the tax GDP ratio is stagnant over the years. So this slide gives you that picture. This is the data from Professor Govinda Rao's paper in 2017, where they looked at the tax GDP ratio over the decades from the 1950s onwards. If you look at 2008, 7, 8 onwards on the centers total, so it is somewhere around 10, 11, 9. So it is moving around 10. And even if you look at the combined tax GDP ratio, it is almost stagnated at around 16. So it is stagnated around 16. So this tax GDP ratio need to be, despite of this is despite the fact that we have undertaken a lot of tax reforms. Probably the tax base need to be captured, maybe need to be captured better, or tax base, there are some things which we are not able to still capture, or it corroborates, so which we need to tax base has to be expanded. Probably that is the issue which it needs serious consideration. Next. So that the question is, now we are going to evaluate the budget. So now we are going to evaluate the tax proposals. So what is the yardsticks which we use to evaluate the budget? So especially the tax proposals. So to evaluate tax proposals, basically, what is the best way is to look at whether they are following canons of taxation or not. So you all know that this famous quotation of Kautilya's Arthashastra, where Kautilya says that the government should collect the taxes the way honeybee collects the honey from the flower, without any damaging the structure of the ecosystem, or with the least pain given. So in the same way, if whether the proposals which are mentioned in the 2022 budget, whether they are adhering to this canons of taxation. So in light of this canons of taxation, we'll try to analyze the tax proposals one by one. Next.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Srihari,
sir,
let us confine to the budget.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll conclude in 5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, okay, please.
So in the tax, in the goods and service tax, basically all the decisions are taken in the GST Council. So next. So since the GST is introduced in 2017, much of the issues, all the issues actually, because it is a GST Council which is to be decided. So all the issues are decided there, but still there are GST issues, and automated return matching system is still not implemented. Rates and slabs have to be rationalized, and we have to bring all the goods under GST, that petroleum and all negotiation is going on. So these are the issues which hopefully will find an answer in the coming months or years. Next. So GST revenues are good in that sense. It is a positive thing. Next. So when it comes to taxes on income and expenditure, so there is no change in the income tax rates, either for individual or for corporation. Probably this is to the fact. Next, please. Next. So what my take on this is that probably the government maintained the status quo for various reasons, because no policy change is also a kind of policy. So government, the policymaker has to take the call. So here what is happening, that the new ITR written, next please. The new ITR website is introduced. Old regime and new regime kind of income tax return is introduced last year, which is yet to be stabilized. And the direct tax code report is pending, which is there in the table ministry. So which some kind of consultation process is maybe underway. So all these things, there is also a global minimum corporate taxation debate going on, and there is also BEPS discussions going on at one point at other front. So given all these circumstances, probably the government did not want to stabilize or change the personal taxation much. So these are the details which you can read out later. Now the main highlight which was there in the budget is about taxation of digital asset. So the digital asset is actually now the new clause is added in the section 2 of 90 as a 947A, where next the digital asset is defined with a very elaborate. This is the full definition of digital virtual asset, where all the cryptocurrencies and various forms of digital currency or digital assets are now considered and defined properly. Now, the unanswered question in the whole in this debate is, there is a couple of questions like in the digital assets, where there are a couple of people which there are a couple of people who buy these digital assets through kind of exchanges, and there are a couple of people which are called miners who solve the algorithms and then accumulate acquire the digital assets because of their tech expertise. So how miners are taxed is not very clear from the budget. So, but there are many issues which are not very clear at this moment. Probably if the law is drafted and put it out, then maybe probably more issues will be solved. Next. Not much on long-term capital gains tax, only the some surcharge is adjusted. Next. Next. Yes, the lot of focus was on customs duty, and I think Kamai sir also mentioned, and Banamu sir also mentioned about the customs duty. Probably this is the issue which can act as a double two-way sword, in the sense there are if you look at little deeper issues, there is a WTO rules which the country has to adhere, and we also have our own commitment of Make in India. So a government has to play play around custom duties within the WTO regime, and also protect as well as nurture our Make in India ambitions. So probably the indication of the increase of around 500 products, mostly when I looked at all these list of products which taxes are increased. So mostly on the capital goods, sorry, not capital goods, the raw materials and in semi-processed and the goods which are produced in India. So to encourage the local manufacturing, this may be a right direction at this moment to protect as well as and their pure capital goods are not taxed much. So in that way, probably it is the right direction, according to me. Next. These are just information which we can skip probably. Next. SEZs again will be a new game changer in the whole debate. How the law will translate, only the time will tell. But if we adopt China kind of model, then a lot many things will change regarding the taxation and tax revenues, whether it will be a net gainer to the physical tax revenues or not, is a question which has to be only a law in the new law will address. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Srihari, for your very analytical presentation, especially from the revenue.
Thank you, sir.
Revenue and taxation side. Thank you very much. I have one question for you.
Sir.
So you were referring to, and Professor Gayatri was also referring to the same thing, this pump priming. Okay, I think this is what government has done during the pandemic period, etc., rather justifiably. But if you look at the historical background of the pump priming, the context was very different. The economy was reeling under a continued state of depression. So through pump priming, lot of money was put into the economy. Basically, the idea was to revive, and the revival idea was based on, as Dr. Bhanumurthy was also referring, on the multipliers, the investment multipliers, how they work on that. But in today's context, the scenario is very different. So the pump priming tends to be inflationary, and inflation will have cascading effect on various sectors. All the targets that government may have fixed, they go topsy-turvy. Okay, so therefore, while analyzing the budget, we will have to be very careful in appreciating what has been done in the past. We'll have to take some of these concepts with a grain of salt. This is my personal view. So now, shall I open this for discussion, Dr. Anand?
Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah. So now the house is open for discussion. Any questions from?
Yes, sir. We got two questions, sir. Like it's there in the question and answers chat box. I'll just read out the question, sir. The question is by Gayatri Priya Jonala, one of our economic student. Respected panel, over the past few years, inflation has been on the rise and little has been done to control it. To be in line with high fiscal expenditure to kick off the economy by increasing employment opportunities, also in line with the inflation-unemployment trade-off in short term. But the reality of employment in India has been very dire. Would you please explain the stark difference in goal of this policy and its actual effect? This is one question, sir. I'll read out both the questions.
Let us take one by one.
Yeah? Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
I think Dr. Bhanumurthy may like to answer this question.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you. I think it's a very interesting question, bringing the trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So that's another reason why I keep stressing on, capital expenditure. And this is what we did in our macroeconometric model. Increase in the revenue expenditure will actually crowd out through increase in inflation and subsequent increase in the interest rates and all those things. So I think what government has done right now, despite, I think Ms. Gayatri, you need to know, when there is so much of discussion about fiscal stimulus and all those things, if you add the government support for the past 3 years, both central government and state government, you'll be surprised to know that as in the general government, the deficit, if you had first year something like close to 14.5% between center and states, and second year something close to 11%, and again this year somewhere close to 10%, the accumulated fiscal deficit in the last 3 years would be somewhere close to 34-35% of GDP. I think this will be the most substantial fiscal stimulus ever provided for an economy, struggling economy like this, compared to any country in the world. I think that one needs to be taken into consideration. So despite this 30 or 35% fiscal stimulus, added to that, there are some more stimulus measures which actually directly add to the public debt component. It will not even come under the fiscal deficit. So despite that, we are still within that 6% threshold of inflation as per the Monetary Policy Committee framework. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that the government, as has been saying for almost a year now, that the strategy, it's a medium-term strategy. In fact, last year budget, you must read very carefully. I think the target that time was actually the public debt to GDP ratio. So you need to really focus that medium term so that you will not, you don't end up in inflationary pressure that most of the advanced countries are reeling right now. And I'm sure if you read any of the newspapers today, they will tell you that advanced countries' inflation is much higher than Indian inflation, despite giving more fiscal stimulus measures. So the quality of expenditure becomes more important, and actually that will also help revive the employment opportunities. I've been telling that employment is a lagging indicator, unlike other indicators. Once there is a recovery in the economy, and because of its own linkages with other informal sector, you should be able to see that more employment opportunities are going to be generated in the medium term. Yes, in the short term, yes, you don't have that because of the gestation issues, but otherwise in the medium term, you should be in a better position to see in India in a better position to really generate more employment opportunities with a less risk disrupt to inflationary pressure.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bhanumurthy. Professor Gayatri, would you like to add anything?
Nothing, sir. I think Dr. Bhanumurthy has given very, very good adequate
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Anand, what is the next question?
Sir, like, why do you think the government wants to discourage the crypto investors worth with 30% tax on gains and only cost of acquisition to be considered as deductible and other policies? So it's all about the and we have also the followed question, sir. Like Archana also asked the question. Also comments on introduction of the digital rupee. Both.
Yeah, I think very good questions.
Yes.
Dr. Naidu, would you like to answer
yes,
this?
Sir. Yes, sir.
On this.
Basically, it is both income. It is only transfer. They're not looking at gain or loss. Even if there is a gain or loss, government is not concerned about it. Only the amount of transfer which is taking place will be taxed at 30%. So no deductions. That is the first point. And the second point is 1% TDS. So the TDS is 1% TDS is primarily to garner the data, and when exchanges will be more compliant, and the tax authorities will get the data of the user, the transactors. So that is one issue. And yeah, there are definitely government want to discourage. The whole issue is to because the whole market of crypto is going beyond the control, so that is why they want to control and discourage. So that is why that high rate. But there will be how many loopholes and all. It's a time will tell only. And the any comment on digital rupee, the shape of digital rupee is still not, the details are not yet out. But if it is anything on the crypto based platform, then it has to compete with other cryptos like Bitcoin and all. So now the question is, if the whole concept of cryptocurrency is anonymity, and why will somebody leverage or invest in digital rupee when they have if the purpose is only investment and all, they may look at if it is lucrative. But as long as anonymity is the question, people will prefer other cryptocurrencies than the digital rupee. Thank you.
But here the specific point is, why should cryptos be, this is a proposal, taxed up to 30%? Then that is the question.
Sir,
is there any logic for doing so?
The deterrence, sir. The high tax rate will be the deterrence for the people to participate in the acquiring this kind of asset, because cryptocurrencies are mostly people are now using for speculative activities and the abnormal profit, abnormal returns. So that will be addressed to some extent. But the problem is the entry of if it is you are entering the crypto market from the Indian coin desk or exchange, then probably you're taxed. But if you are a minor, or if you are operating from some other crypto exchanges which are not in the Indian jurisdiction, how they're going to tax, it is not very clear, sir, as of now.
Any more questions, Dr. Anand?
Yes, I mean, this is also again on cryptocurrency only. I think.
Yeah. The government has declared that cryptocurrency will never be the legal tender. In that context, any comments on the introduction of the digital rupee?
I think already
it is very much. Shall I answer, sir?
Yes.
Please, quick answer. Yeah.
It is in the budget speech itself. The FM has clearly mentioned that it is not going to be parallel currency or the legal tender at any point of time. That is very clear. But if you look at the finance bill, the definition is given as a digital asset. So now people are the tax authority point of view, it is a digital asset. So definitely you're using this for the transaction. Maybe that is a different angle. But so the whole issue of legal tender, because if it is coordinated by IMF and if many countries are now trying to pitch in, so probably they want to control the whole crypto market. So legal tender issue is not
an issue
coming into the debate. As it is only considered as an asset now, as for the current scenario.
Yeah, but the question is whether it is an asset or the motive is speculation. Why should such a high rate as high as 30% be imposed? I think that was the specific question. All the younger minds now, who are prospective investors, they're quite watchful about the developments in cryptos. So they may be curious to know what is the sanctity of this number 30, that is percentage, 30%. Is the motive of the government is to discourage? If that is the case, then pass a law that it is prohibited and it should never be traded with. Why this kind of dual thinking on this?
Sir, I think even FM may not be able to answer this question. So
honestly, I don't know, sir.
For a simple comment, Professor Bhanamurthy, I think.
So for a simple reason, sir, I think there were a lot of dilly-dallying on this particular issue. Yes. In fact, if you look at even the finance secretary and other, I think revenue secretary also post-budget discussions, he was clearly telling that there was almost decided to ban the cryptocurrency in this country. I think the draft, that was in the winter session was almost saying that needs to be banned. And I think, there are many pressure groups and lobbies which have, and I think the governor very clearly, RBI governor very clearly mentioned that I don't think India should allow the cryptocurrency. And he said, if RBI is saying, please listen to us. I think they had a lot of clarity, I think, from the regulators, but somewhere it got pushed up. And even now, I think the post-budget discussions very clearly say that they're still discussing about how to deal with this cryptocurrency. And in the absence of any decision, they already knew that that portfolio has actually increased substantially in Indian economy. I think they are trying to really, as Dr. Naidu pointed out, trying to discourage, but we have to wait and see how that is going to be played out. So it's still a policy issue question for all of us.
Yeah, I think this dilemma, whether to allow or not, like Hamlet's dilemma, to be or not to be.
Yes, yes.
This is analogous to the earlier, whether current account convertibility should be allowed or not. In fact, this debate, this dilemma went on for quite some time. Is it because of some kind of policy lags? Why can't, the government take a firm view on that and be prepared for the consequences?
I think so. It's actually, I mean, again, as I told you, I always said that I don't understand this crypto market. So it's a black box and all those things I keep saying. No, but I think what is coming from the regulators is very clear. The regulator of this financial market are SEBI or the regulator of the banking sector, currency markets. They're very clear that India should not go for, cryptocurrency, legalizing that. But I think the North Bloc has its own confusion. My feeling is that they still maybe struggling to really see how to manage this whole situation.
Yeah, I think that is a correct description. This confusion gets compounded,
yes,
if not cleared at the earliest.
Yes, exactly.
Sir, just can I add a point, sir?
Yeah.
There is one issue. If you look at the market composition of cryptos, mostly 1-2% of the people who are participating are the miners. Miners in the sense who mine the cryptos, like gold mining or something like that, and remaining are the people who participate through the exchanges. So the blockade is now tax and the TDS is at the point of exchanges where normal people like me and you try to invest money and speculate. So there, for normal people, since we are not miners and we cannot evade, so probably it will be a blockade which will be effective to some extent. So if there are other means, we don't know, but to some extent that will be a blockade, sir.
Very true, very true.
Hello.
Actually, the speculation need not be viewed cynically, because take the case of equities market. Are there not speculators? So therefore, speculation in today's context has become part and parcel of the game of finance.
Yeah, I think that's what the finance secretary said. We are treating at the moment as a gamble. So that may be one way to look at it.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Dr. Ghansham Pandey is having.
Hello, sir. Can I have?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much to each and everyone, panelists, the speakers. It was a wonderful discussion. They have already highlighted all the pros and cons, right? So I have a very small two points, right? One, as Professor Kamaya said that, and the Professor Vanumurthy mentioned that the government is now, from the last budget we have seen more or less, focused toward the expenditure, right? In that sense, what would be the big challenges for the income and expenditure adjustment in this budget? Because it will be only we focus in the supply side and you are talking about the expenditure. So how we will adjust?
Yeah, Professor Gayatri, would you like to answer this?
I don't know what he means by income. Does he refer to receipts?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Talking about the review.
Yeah, talking about the receipts, yes, I think, I think on receipts, Dr. Srihari has explained very clearly what our position has been. We've been having serious concerns about improving the tax buoyancy over a bit of time, and there has been a lot of stagnancy as such. How to bridge a balance is kind of a big question mark, fiscal question that we need to really address, whether we are really trying to do that. Okay, so this is where, at least I'm not really going to talk about receipts. At least definitely I will say that it is time to sort of review expenditure. I think public expenditure efficiency, which I think Professor Banamurthy also talked about. I think this is where we can tweak a little, not a little, a lot. If you take the entire country as a whole, both at the national level and also at the subnational level, I think the effort has to be on the expenditure front rather than, of course, revenue has to be raised. We need to really promote the tax efficiency too. But I think the need of the hour is to focus more on expenditure. Yeah, try to get some savings on that.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
Another very small
Can I?
points. Yes, sir, please.
when I'm listening to Professor Gayatri, I was just like on a lighter way. I thought we should learn from Andhra government how to manage expenditures and revenues.
Right,
But on a serious note, I think Professor Ganesham, it's a very important question that he asked. We need to really look at the causality between these revenues and expenditures. In my view, I think the causality leads from capital expenditure to growth, growth to revenues, and revenues to revenue expenditure. So that is what right now the most apt, causal link that we need to have. So, and I think as we have been arguing that for the past 2 years, the government seems to have taken that kind of a path, and that is one way of balancing. Sir, if you allow me, I'll just take 20 seconds to add one more point.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think on a broader way, if you look at for the past 10 years, there is too much of discrepancy between the budgeted and the actuals, right? And we have been seeing that's been happening, what we call it as fiscal marksmanship. And I think the fiscal marksmanship is, the deterioration of fiscal marksmanship is entirely, in my view, maybe more than 70-80% of that deterioration can be explained by one single variable, which is the disinvestment proceeds, whatever you plan and whatever you actually. So I was just thinking aloud, I started writing on this. Can we separate this whole disinvestment proceeds as part of our, fiscal deficit or the revenues that we are calculating in the budget, so that, all the disinvestment proceeds should be allowed to, release some of the public debt rather than adding into the books of accounts. We always do that. Our budget liabilities, we do it. I similarly, why can't we do that on the revenue side also? The disinvestment should be separated from the overall, the non-tax revenues and the NDCR that we talk about, that non-debt creating capital receipt that we receive. So I thought, suddenly I just thought that could be one way going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. It merits attention. Yeah.
Can I have one more? This is a comment kind of the thing, so you people can put, forward it. So, what we have seen previously, whenever the government makes any policy, they generally ignore the middle class, right? And particularly during the economic crisis. Even it was during the pandemic last year, and what happened? The government tries to try to help the lower section of the society while completely ignoring the middle class. Thus, if you see the 1/3 of the middle class, they went below the poverty line. Now, in this scenario, inequality is going up, increasing inequality, right? That is also big challenges for the the government, how they will tackle in this scenario. So, can you enlighten us with some of your views?
I think Professor Shanmugam.
Yes, sir. Sir, regarding
mute, I think.
Yeah. No, sir. By this unmute.
Okay, please. Yeah.
Are you hearing me now?
Yeah. I think now we are.
Okay. See, basically, budget is for all, not specifically for poor or middle or rich people. So the government, but the priorities differ from year to year. So the budget is a continuous process. It is not for 1 year. Every year they are doing, as rightly pointed out by somebody else earlier, the budget figures are only estimates. So we come to know the actual after 2 years only. But there is a gap, of course. But the priority will change. For example, a few years ago, we were talking about $5 trillion US economy. But nobody now talks about that. Then sometimes we said that we are going to doubling the farm income. But now completely we ignored on this. So that's what based on the situation, the scenario change. So, but anyhow, it is the duty of the government to address based on the priorities. Okay, currently, the pandemic and its impact, there is no fiscal space for the government. But already I pointed out that the 4 years average growth rate is only 3%. So they don't have the revenue buoyancy. So they are predicting only 6% increment of the revenue deficit over the previous year. So money is not there. Already fiscal deficit is 6.4% they projected. But we don't know whether it will go up or not, depending upon whether the pandemic will again continue. We don't know, because now we are coming out of the third wave. But now there are information that the other version of COVID-19 will come back. So there are a lot of uncertainties. Based on the situation, they have to do it. So now the priorities, they cannot give it to for one section. Depending on the scenario only, the government will take a policy.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Shanmugam. So, Dr. Anand, any more questions?
No, sir. We can stop.
Yeah. Okay. So now, before we close, I may like to have one or two points of observation to invite comments from the panelists. The first one is somewhat methodological. How to analyze a budget? Okay. So last several years, wherever I happen to watch people discussing the budget, what they do is they take percentages, maybe estimates, budget estimates. They look at the trends in the previous years. Okay. So they compare sometimes the immediate previous year, and on a few other occasions, they take trend for the past 3-4 years. Then they start commenting. It's a deviation from the past, or the same deviation is characterized that this is somewhat a breakthrough. It's quite revealing this and that. So my question is, an economy evolves. Growth is an evolving process. And the budget, at best, may be viewed as a shock. It could be a positive shock or a negative shock. So therefore, in my view, the budget that is presented should be viewed in terms of ex ante or ex post shock. So to what extent the shock would disturb or would promote the ongoing processes. So if budget could be analyzed, as Dr. Bhanumati was also telling, from the medium-term perspective or a long-term perspective, that would be more meaningful. Otherwise, point-to-point comparison, like last year it happened like this, it is a deviation. Some people qualifying the deviation as good, and some people calling it as some kind of regressive, whatever adjectives that people may have. So this is one observation I would like to bring to the notice of my fellow panelists. Second observation, while doing this way, there are lots of trade-offs. For example, there's a trade-off between increase in capital expenditure and mounting debt. Given that the tax revenue has already reached some kind of plateau, okay? So there is a trade-off. On the one hand, like in comparative static analysis, we take the view that mounting debt is not good. On the other hand, we invite increased expenditure on capex, thinking that it would generate employment, it would promote growth process, etc. Individually, yes, good. Increase in capital expenditure is good. Reduction in debt is good. But what about the trade-off? Is there any mechanism, a sustained mechanism to resolve this kind of trade-off? Okay. So therefore, budget presentation should be seen in terms of certain trades-off. That may give us a spotlight, a meaningful focus on the budget analysis. I think these are the two observations I would like to share with the panelists.
Yes. Can I say something on this? Sir?
Yes, Professor Shanmugam, welcome.
Okay, sir. Basically, as we discussed earlier, budget is simply a financial statement of the government, sir. But of course, finance minister or government also express their vision or policy in the coming years through the budget. But there is a time gap between the estimates and then actuals. So budget basically to be evaluated based on the outcome it created. So that's what people are talking about, efficiency of the public expenditure. But it could be ex post analysis. But because when they submit a budget, we get the number, we don't know whether it is going to be the actual number or deviate or something like that. We can come to know only after 2 years. So the budget evaluation, strictly speaking, should be done ex post. This is one view, sir. The other one is the already, government finance is one of the aspects which support the growth or welfare of the society. Because the society consists of various sectors, everybody's contribution leads to the growth, not only the budget alone. So government is one of the agency which support the growth process. So that is the reason why but the government, in the budget, there are various agencies are competing, various items are competing. So as you rightly pointed out, there is a trade-off. If they increase the allocation for one sector or one aspect, obviously they have to reduce the other one given their fiscal phase. But basically, that is why we have the FRBM, the Budget Discipline Act. So it suggests that if you are able to generate revenues consistent with your growth, so at least you have to have the revenue buoyancy of one or more, then you can incur more revenue expenditure. But in order to create investment which will have multiplier effect and then induce your growth, you can borrow, because the money invested will definitely bring return in future. So that is the reason why we allow borrowing by the government, but there should be a limit. Otherwise, they will get into debt trap. So FRBM Act says that your net borrowing should not exceed 3%. Even internationally, all agencies agreed that. I think in most country, I found that they are having the 3% ceiling. But of course, the Eurozone, when they created, they said 3% limit for the whole country. But in India, we set a 3% limit for the central government and 3% limit for the state government. Of course, we are already giving a 6% fiscal phase. But despite we are not able to maintain this debt sustainability issue, already we discussed that we have more than 90% GDP debt GDP ratio. So this means the government should be very careful about this one. So it is not only the central government, even state governments are violating. There is no mechanism to control, and this is what keep on going on.
Good. I think I agree with you. About the budget outcomes. Is there any literature, Dr. Vanmurthy, wherein budget outcomes are measured every time when a budget is presented? We expect the outcome to be of a particular type, in a particular direction. Okay, but we never take the feedback. We never pause and ask ourselves. We never make an attempt to see whether the outcomes are realized or not. It's not in terms of revised budget, not in those terms. A scientific framework within which budget outcomes are measured, at least, partially.
Yeah, so I think this brings to the point that we have been discussing. Yes, actually, at the central government level, to some extent, you have some data to really look at, on a almost like a daily basis for some of the programs. Especially if you look at the rural development programs, in fact, you can look at even hourly basis the kind of progress that's happening in some of the flagship programs like MGNREGS or Awas Yojana and all those things. But there are other areas which I don't think there is much information is available, except to see to what extent the allocated expenditures have been spent. In fact, even a most important sector like defense, where you just keep looking at only the CGA website, how much the defense ministry has spent, but we really don't know for what they're spending and to what it is being allocated. Those things we really don't have. And of course, there is a CAG report comes up, I think after 12 months of the financial year. In fact, that is the most critical document. In fact, I look at it very carefully, but I don't think anybody looking at very carefully in that particular. So the CAG comes out with so many observations in terms of how the government departments and the line ministries are actually spending. So the CAG document would be the most crucial document if you want to really analyze the budgets. In fact, for the state governments also, they come out with within 12 months. Right now, I was looking at the Karnataka CAG report. So in fact, it has more information on how this budget is being efficient in terms of spending for whatever that it's been allocated. But otherwise, for the centrally sponsored schemes, sir, we do have a better tracking mechanism. But sir, you raised a very important issue previously, that how to look at the budgets. I'm glad that the size of the budget is actually coming down. Even the time of the budget talks also coming down. The size of the documents are coming down, except for one. So in a way, there are many ingredients which we used to hear in the past. I think they have been kept outside the budget right now. Like the whole indirect taxes is completely outside, and we don't tinker with the direct taxes anymore. Only thing left is this custom duty. So if that also comes out, I think it's going to be more of an expenditure document with some projections here and there. But as you rightly pointed out, I think the budgets, in the absence of institutions that can look at a medium-term perspective, because I'm talking about Planning Commission, in the absence of institutional support for the medium-term perspective, I think the budget should become a medium-term document, and they were supposed to be including the medium-term frameworks, but for the past 2 years, we don't really have that document. And in fact, I've been arguing even at the state also, we have a good framework in terms of sustainable development goals, which is a little longish framework for 2030. So I've been arguing that every government, whether it's a central or state governments, they need to have a macro fiscal framework which is consistent with at least some part of the SDGs, if not the whole of SDG, so that you'll have a long-term perspective in this country. Just added to that, sir, right now we do have that mid-year review. I mean, unfortunately, again, we don't see in the last 2 years, there's the mid-year review exercise seems to be missing with respect to the union budget. I think that mid-year review also becomes very important. One small 10 seconds I'll take, sir, with regard to the trade-off between the capex and the debt. I would like to again repeat my whatever I said at the beginning. Based on the experience working with the finance commissions, so the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, and public debt to GDP ratio, all three targets are consistent with the growth, sir, actually. So when we are doing this analysis, we just try to do one simulation where we are trying to bring down the revenue deficit to zero. Okay. So the next 5 years down the line, if you can reduce the revenue deficit to zero sequentially, actually that brings down the fiscal deficit to 3%, close to 3%. In fact, public debt to GDP ratio is also less than 70%. And that also was giving us an average growth of 8.2%. So in a sense, if you look at it in a simultaneous fashion, one single trigger in the fiscal policy that bringing down the fiscal revenue deficit will actually help you to achieve other objectives of bringing down the fiscal deficit and as well as bringing down the public debt to GDP ratio, at the same time achieving a decent GDP growth. So when I repeated also, I was still getting the same kind of a results. Even for the 15th Finance Commission, when we presented, We said that you can still achieve 5 trillion economy in this 15th Finance Commission period, provided you will revert back to the original FRB Act of 2003. So there is a technical support for those kind of adjustments. Thank you.
Yeah, I think good. Yeah.
So if I just add a couple of points to the outcome, this thing that you referred to, just 1 minute. Professor Kamaya, can I come in?
Yes, please, madam, please.
Yeah. I mean, you've raised such core issues about budget discussions that have been happening. I think it's just in the absence of all other sophisticated kind of discussions, we're just talking about increase, decrease over the previous year and nothing more than that. And just based on the numbers, increase, decrease, we judge the budget, whether it is really good, it's bad. I think that's something which we need to really desist doing from as such. I think the last point which you referred to, Dr. Bhanumurthy gave a very good response. I mean, his response about financial outcomes. Okay. In the sense how the money is used, there are some fiscal management data for some of these flagship programs which is being presented, and that data is available. I think more than this, I think in the context of budget, what we need to look at is the outcomes, physical, not the final outcomes, the end impact of these programs, because that is where we start our entire focus on. We want to achieve this, we want to achieve this. Okay. I mean, I think the allocations have to be definitely made on a proper scientific assessment of the outcomes achieved. I understand the challenges which are there in this, because there are many extraneous factors which impact on the outcomes, and also there is a long gestation period. It's not necessary that you spend the money this year and the result happens in the very next year or the same year. But we need to, I mean, even if not, we have this kind of this thing in place, at least we need to have a framework where how we sort of track these outcomes. It's so unfortunate that excepting for some of these flagship programs, leave alone tracking the outcomes, we do not even have the indicators for which we should be tracking the outcomes as such. First, we need to really identify the outcome indicators. What is it that we should be tracking and how they are behaving over a period of time? And I think that is what should serve as the basis for arriving at expenditure allocations. Okay, this is what we call it as informed decision making. I think evidence-based informed decision making as such. I don't think we are anywhere close to that particular exercise, while a number of countries have actually been able to make a very good progress. What has happened is time and again, we are trying to reinvent the same wheel actually. We come back with new frameworks and then we are not doing any progress. And then again, we chunk it completely and then come back and try out the different sets of frameworks. And in the first place, just to think that every scheme will have an impact or outcome is to be completely dropped. You need to start looking at the kind of a program impacts. I think there has to be a lot more work which has to be done in assessing that. And I think until the time we try to do some kind of a meaningful, professional outcome-based budgeting, these kind of just number crunching where we look at last year, this much was spent, and this year, this is the amount which we have spent, whether it is good or bad, depending on the size of increase, has to be totally gotten over with. Thank you so much, sir. Those points that you raised were wonderful. Thank you.
I think I agree with you.
Yes.
But my point was slightly different.
Yes, sir.
Take the case of CAG.
Yes.
What CAG does is how money is to be spent and how money is actually spent. Based on the gap, CAG would pass some comments. But in my view, this is not the outcome assessment. Outcome here, there are three things. One is the desired target. Yes. Second, the actual, what actually has been sent, and what is the norm. Okay. So comparing the norm with the actual is easy because both are measurable magnitudes and gap can be highlighted. Right. So, but what is difficult is what is desired and to what extent the gap between the desired and actual is narrowed down. It's very difficult to assess because what is desired cannot be exactly quantified. It's not a simple number that growth should be, say, to the order of 6.7%. It's not like that. An overall assessment. Then second thing, evaluating a program is easy, like what the government officials doing, that mid-year evaluation, etc. On a month-to-month or year-to-year basis, that exercise is easy. Whether the program that is financed, the program that is initiated, whether it has the desired effect at the economy level. Actually, that kind of assessment, studies of that kind, to evolve a framework and to assess the success of the program in a particular framework. I think this is what I meant. Though what is happening is fine, but this should also be initiated, since you people are very active working with the governments and the policymakers. When we say assessment of the outcomes, it should be in this sense, in a macroeconomic sense. Yeah. So, Dr. Anand.
Can I add one, sir? Can I have 10 seconds?
Sure.
Yeah, sir, actually, maybe instead of calling it as the outcome document, we should say that output document. There's a difference between the output and outcome. And I completely agree with you that some of this, outcomes are very difficult to, quantify. In fact, we are struggling, like right now, what determines IMR now? We are looking at one variable IMR, and there are many policy interventions. So what determines IMR is one thing that becomes. So it is not the outcome is not limited to one line department expenditure alone.
Exactly.
In fact, there are many things that we are talking about right now. The IMR outcome differ not only based on the outlays, but it also depends on the governance in that district or the governance in that region. So I think one thing that one can, I'm just thinking aloud, one thing one can really look at is, at least this kind of some of the schemes where we have better databases, that can be really looked at. For example, I keep telling about rural development because I have done more work in that area. So there are targets that have been fixed for this department or the programs. For example, RD has to build some 25 lakh houses in this particular year. So whether that kind of targets have been achieved by the end of the financial year, depending on the allocations that is being made for those line departments. So some we can definitely do, but I completely agree with you, but there are many, it's extremely difficult to really quantify the outcomes and track the outcomes. So, but outputs maybe to some extent one can really do.
Yeah, sir, can I add one more aspect, sir?
Yeah, please.
The problem is that, this is true, that you cannot measure outcome for all items. But there are items where the outcome can be measured physically. For example, roads, drinking water, and something like that. But in some other cases, the output may not be physical. It may be non-physical. But that's what uniform methodology cannot be applied to evaluate all the allocations. So we need to figure out based on the type of outcome or output, whatever it is. Okay. So the evaluation strategy will be different. But of course, putting everything together and come and say that this budget is better or not, very, very difficult. So the reality, it is very, very difficult, sir. But wherever possible, I think it is possible to evaluate. Already Dr. Bhanumurthy pointed out, for certain centrally sponsored scheme, they have the output. Similarly, road and so on, we can be able to measure the output physically. But there are cases where it is not possible, where you can apply something like cost effectiveness analysis, something like that possible. And also the way they implemented, even I find there are certain departments, they implement many schemes, and also the cost of the department exceeds the benefit of the projects. So there are many other issues are there, but I think this is the area where more attention, more research is required, sir.
Yeah, correct.
To add one point, since Dr. Bhanumurthy also has been doing a lot of work in this area, is in terms of sequencing of this availability of information. Whether you get it after the budget is passed or you get it before the budget. Because if you want to take some decisions, whether it is output, outcome, whatever information we have, should we bring it before the budget, make an understanding or an assessment of our impacts, and then present the budget, or do a post-mortem after the budget is presented? I think sometime in the month of July, we get the so-called performance budget documents as such. I think an important question is also about sequencing the availability of information. Yeah.
Yeah, you will not get any information before the budget is presented. Otherwise, the FM will lose her job. But here, only one last point from my side I would like to add. Take the case of laying of a road. Let us say with this budget, so many kilometers of road is to be laid. Now the evaluation requires whether the road is actually laid or not. But what is the purpose of laying that road? Whether at least for next 5 years, people are able to use the road, whether vehicles could go. By the next season, say rainy season, the roads are washed out. So the ultimate purpose of laying the road is this, not whether the road length is completed or not. So when I said the outcome evaluation, it should be in terms of realizing that, not the measurable magnitudes that any auditor can do, any physical checking engineer can do. But what an economist should do is something much beyond that. This is what I meant.
So we look at number of accidents.
Yes, even that also could be.
Yeah, actually, that is one of the outcome variable that we use in our numbers.
Though from a negative side, yes, it is an important.
No, that's the most important, I feel.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
No, I think while we have this information, sir, it's also important that we identify these indicators and have some data collection mechanism in place. How much of data we have, I think, for these variables? Except, for a very, very broad set of variables, we have some data. But for the others, we don't have the data at all. And what is the authenticity of this data? That's also a big question mark, actually.
Very true, very true.
Including GDP data, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think that was a big debate again.
Yes.
So, Dr. Hari, you have any questions? Hello. Venkatesh.
No, sir, I don't.
Venkatesh, reboot.
No, sir.
Dr. Anand,
Yes, sir.
anything else? Shall we conclude?
Yes, sir. So now I request Dr. Hari Venkatesh to propose the vote of thanks.
Yeah, before he does that,
Yes,
let me thank all the panelists. We had really brilliant discussions and many new insights, have come up in the discussion. I think I thank all the panelists who joined me in having a very fruitful discussion on the budget. So thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
From my side,
Thank
it's
you.
over.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of the Department of Economics, SRM University, Andhra Pradesh, extended a very hearty vote of thanks to the honorable professors who blessed with us their participation, took out their valuable time of a busy schedule. We have been fortunate to have them. They have a significant policy experience and academic teaching. They have provided valuable information to us regarding a budget. I'm sure that the participants must have been benefited by attending this event. And I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Professor Ananda Rao for his commitment and towards this discussion. And also I extend special thanks to the Professor V.S. Rao, our Vice Chancellor, for inspiring us always. I thank my faculty colleagues, Dr. Manjur, Dr. Pandey, Dr. Kamal Sai, for their continuous support. I'm very grateful to Professor Kamaya and Professor Srinivas Desikan for guiding us to organize this event. And finally, I thank the ITKM people for their technical support. So with this, once again, I thank all you, one and all, and I will conclude the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, sir.
Venkatesh.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye everybody.
Bye, sir. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for joining us.